Yo, what's up?
What's going on, Joe?
How you doing?
Good.
Oh, man, it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been some
It's
time.
been a minute, eh?
Yeah.
So most people are looking at you going, who's this dude? And, well, this is Henock. And Henock and I go way back. I'm talking way back when you were wearing diapers.
Yeah. Way back.
Way back. So I was like, what was that? Your babysitter slash nanny? No.
Slash coach.
Coach.
Yeah. A lot of different hats, yeah.
So, yeah, I've known you since you were a baby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we go back since what, the 90s? Was it the 90s?
Yeah, it feels like the 1800s right
Feels like
now,
the
but
1800s,
90s, yeah.
Yeah.
So you were this little baby pup. I used to come over to your place and I used to just run around. My style of babysitting was basically just run around, see how tired you guys could get. That was my experience early on.
No, I would love to having you over every time you came over. You know, we got excited. Joe's coming over.
Joe, the entertainer, I was the guy, yeah. I was the guy. But then you grew up, and do you know what I remember is when you really picked up basketball, and we used to just shoot around.
Yeah.
And we used to play at the YMCA.
Yeah, you used to take me to some of the courts and play with the older guys, and couldn't really hang at that point, but it was a good learning experience. Good to get exposed to that kind of competitive level. Yeah,
but you had it in you like really early on, because I mean, obviously you're physically tall.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily mean all tall people can play basketball.
No.
James Harkness, can you play basketball?
No, I suck at basketball.
See, just because you're tall. But I remember playing with you, and until you were about 11 years old, I was dominating. But then at 11, I could tell that it was getting a little bit more difficult. So I told you, I don't know if you remember this, but I said, I will never play against you one-on-one.
Yeah, I remember that actually. I remember that. And you never did.
I never did. So I'm undefeated.
You retired on top.
Yeah, I retired on top.
Smart.
But it's really been fun watching you, grow up and become this really not just good, but a great basketball player.
Appreciate that.
And yeah. And tell me a little bit, like because one of the things that I noticed about you early on was your drive. Like you were so driven. Mm-hmm. Where did that come from?
I started young. I picked up a basketball when I was about 5. I used to watch Jordan and the Bulls play with my sister, my elder sister, Magda. And she used to love the game, and she used to actually play. She was pretty good.
Yeah.
She played for her middle school team, and she used to win a whole bunch of championships. And I was like, man, like I want to be like Big Sis. And so I used to take the ball, and I used to go out in the neighborhood. I used to play. The older guys would never let me play, but after a while, I just I don't know. I had this like you said, a drive to just constantly want to get better every day. If there was somebody that came to the court, I wanted to challenge them, see where I measured up. And then that kind of just took a toll of its own, and then the career took off, and was able to have play at a high competitive level. And
yeah, I mean, it took you all the way to the States.
Yeah,
and that's the fun part. I know you used to go to St. Pat's, and you guys had a pretty dominant team. Most people don't even know where St. Patrick's is, but anyways, it's a school in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Southside
in the house.
Yeah. But then you quickly realized that you needed to go. I guess that's the question I want to ask you, is that you went to the States to play ball there. Mm-hmm. And so it was in Chicago, eh?
Yeah. So come my grade 12 year, I was a pretty standout athlete. I was ranked, I think, top 5 guards in the country, and had won about 2 championships with St. Pat's, and I was leading scorer. I was setting scoring records at St. Pat's. I was getting a lot of attention and whatnot from Canadian coaches and universities. But my dream growing up was to, play in the big leagues, and so I wanted to chase that. I wanted to pursue that. And so I went south of the border. I went to Chicago. I had family in Chicago, and then you know, I tried my luck, and yeah, I was able to play for Malcolm X. Played for them, and came back.
That's a high school?
No, it's a college
Okay.
on the west side of Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
High school. What am I thinking?
Yeah. No, and yeah, it was really competitive out there.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more than what I was used to, but I was able to adjust and held my own.
Mm-hmm. And how did that shape you? Moving from Canada to United States, being the new guy.
Yeah, you especially going into there, man. It's like those guys are wolves. You know, those guys are they're gonna go after it. A lot of these guys, their only way out of that circumstance is sports, right? And so they take it almost like it's a religion. And you come in, you know, you're coming in, you're a foreign guy, you're coming in to take one of those spots. They want to rip your head off, right? So yeah, you really have to come in and say, no, you hold your own, and then you get that respect. But it was tough. It definitely gave me a level of toughness that I carry with me today. You know, that grit. It's definitely what I took away from Chicago.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what are some things? Because after you came back, I noticed that you weren't necessarily the same dude.
Yeah.
Things had changed, and I could see it.
Yeah.
I could feel it. And maybe in your own words, if you could describe what, because obviously you're in Chicago.
Yeah.
Currently, right now, probably one of the more violent places.
Chirac.
Yeah.
It's no joke. Yeah.
And yet here you were in the midst of this environment. So how did that shape you?
Yeah, you know, like you said, you know, they call it Chirac for a reason. You know, it's literally a war zone. You know, I think the amount of people that are, you know, dying on the streets over there, and it did give me like a sixth sense. You know, thrown into that environment, you know, you're forced to get into survival mode, right? And you pick up different, like you sharpen your instincts, right? Your head's always on a swivel, like what's going on, you know, you gotta. So definitely develop that, and you know, your street smarts get a lot better as well. Coming back and trying to, you know, reintegrate into the way things are happening here in the capital and in Canada, it was different. It took a process to readjust, but yeah, I was just able to develop a lot more instincts and just, you know, read people. I was forced to having to read people right away for survival reasons, right? Because you just never know out there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Would you say that translated into basketball? Being able to read people
read
more?
And react.
Maybe,
yeah. I think everything is kind of interwoven,
right?
And you're able to use. Sometimes you think it's like, oh man, you know, I'm stuck in a bad situation, but that bad situation ends up being, you know, a blessing for you in a completely different space. So yeah, I was able to read and react faster on the basketball court. And on the basketball court, I noticed that coming back, when I came back to play in Canada, I was a lot tougher than the average player here, and you know, I just went after it differently, and they could see that too as well. You know, I was because the level of basketball that was played at the time in Canada. Now Canada has progressed as far as competitively, but at that time, you know, they weren't really as aggressive. Their style of play was more European.
Yeah.
Whereas when I was coming from south of the border, it was a lot more grit, a lot more tenacity, a lot more in your face.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, like you said, it's Chicago.
Yeah.
It's violent there.
Yeah.
There's poverty there, and there's, like they say, two ways out: rap or basketball, right? And, so I mean, they're playing like their life literally depends on it, and not just their life, but they're doing it for their family, for their mom, for their pops, for their brothers and sisters, because they're the way out, right?
Exactly.
And when there's a basketball star, they protect that person because they're like, he's got the hoop dreams. We got to take care of him because he could bring the whole hood up.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and sometimes it got to the point where, you know, if you take somebody's position, and just like he said, their whole, like his literally his whole neighborhood is riding on his back and banking on him. And, you know, and sometimes, you know, there's a lot of players who died because of that.
Because he took a spot.
He took a spot, so he has to go.
Sheesh.
It's crazy, because that's really difficult for somebody. I mean, you didn't, you came from Canada. It wasn't like you came from,
That's difficult for everybody here to understand. Nobody lives like that.
Even our ghettos are in relationship to theirs.
Yeah,
it might seem to be a little bit
middle class.
Well, and a lot of people ask me that because I grew up in Russell, the projects in Ottawa, community housing and whatnot. The dynamics are pretty similar, believe it or not. But there's a lot more. Well, there's a lot more people, but also there's a lot more guns, a lot more drugs. So that creates a lot more violence. And
the guns are so much more easily accessible in the States, right?
Exactly.
And they're way cheaper. Like here, it's a couple grand just for a handgun.
Yeah.
Over there, it's like a couple $100.
Yeah, there's people
right?
selling. There's people selling guns in their backyards and stuff.
Wow.
You can get it for pretty cheap. So, yeah, it's the jungle. They call it the jungle.
Yeah, it's the jungle.
Yeah.
Concrete.
And what do you think has created, like, I mean, you experienced it, and I think in light of what's going on right now in our world, in which there is, social unrest, especially when it comes to the race issue.
Yeah.
Chicago is kind of the, the center of this discussion. And one of the things I've always fascinated by it, and maybe you can help me is here, is I would look at most of the politicians that are running the city are black. Yet somehow that leadership hasn't trickled down to the average, black person.
Yeah.
And do you know, like, just having been there and seen, the environment, why is there such a huge chasm between having power and then being able to take that power and actually translate it to the everyday people?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think it's layered. Back when I was in Chicago, I wasn't really politicized. So looking back in hindsight, now that I won't say that I'm like the most versed in politics and understand, what's really cool. There are a lot of moving pieces, I think. But I can't exactly give you a definite answer of what's going on. There are weird things going on, and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, you just know what's going on the street.
Yeah.
And the people that you're hanging out with.
Exactly.
On a day-to-day basis. Yeah. And the culture.
Exactly, the culture. But as far as like the political space, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily care to know about the political space of it because I myself don't know.
Yeah.
And everybody has an opinion. I'm more interested in the sense of the culture. I've always been interested in culture because culture ultimately trumps everything.
Right.
So if whatever culture that you carry or you've carried historically is going to motivate your actions, whether you like it or not, the environment and all that stuff. And so I'm always interested in understanding about those individuals that are able to even come out of those really difficult environments. And like you were sharing with me, some of your buddies that you're still connected to are doing really well. They're buying real estate, they're doing all this stuff. And I guess the question is more about the mindset of an individual, how they're able to, not necessarily submit to the environment that they brought in, and somehow they're able to supplant it.
Right. Yeah. Probably God's grace. You gotta, sometimes you just gotta look up in the sky and just be like, it's a bigger purpose for sure.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the statistics wise, how they're beating some of those odds is kind of miraculous.
I'm not big into politics, but I don't know if it's so much of a race thing, more as it is like the Democrat and Republic, because it's always been Democrat in Chicago. Am I right about that for the most part?
For the most part, yeah. Yeah, I believe so.
Right, because there's different views and and foundations that each one of those are built on. And again, like I think politics is a whole BS game in itself. You know what I mean? Yeah. But you can compare it to certain states. Like Texas has its hoods, but Texas is doing better than Chicago. That's for sure. Right. And they're super Republican.
Right. Yeah, there's something, you know, there's a saying in Chicago. They say the devil lives in Chicago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. There's a history of corruption.
Yeah, there's just a lot. There's a lot going on over there.
Capone came from there.
Capone, Larry Hoover, he's serving 7 life sentences.
Wow.
For conspiracy.
He wasn't the one that like started the Crips, was he?
So he started the GDs.
Okay.
Wow.
He was one of the founding.
I see Hoover and you think Hoover Crips. That's where my mind goes.
Yeah, he was one of the founders of the GDs.
Right.
And he's doing 7 life sentences based off just conspiracy. So
wow.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that.
So they never
city.
actually caught him for something.
Oh no, and
that's what conspiracy means,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But they know he did it.
I don't think
basically.
there was concrete evidence or anything like that.
Right.
But yeah, no, there's a lot going on in that city, man. There's it's hard to pinpoint what is the driving force of it all.
Right.
But,
yeah, and it could just be like just the again, it's the forget the whole politics side of it. It's just the culture, right? So the way that Chicago, and it's like, you know, it's hard to change when you live inside that culture. You adapt and you start maneuvering the way that you feel like you have to survive.
Right.
So what's going to break the chain, right? It takes that one person. And like from what I see, I listen to these guys like Seven. He's a Christian rapper. You know who that is by chance?
No, I haven't.
He's like the most gangster Christian rapper I ever met in my life. Like he was has the big B tattooed on his neck and everything, right? But he like still lives in the hood in Sacramento. Okay, in Oak Park. It's like known for being like a ghetto, and like he's really trying to affect his neighborhood and hasn't moved out. And it's like that one person, and you know what, like I find that if you're not doing it for God, then there's selfish motives behind it and you won't be as effective inside of a bad neighborhood, right? So this guy really lives for God, sacrifices himself and wants to see his neighborhood saved, wants the devil out, basically. Like, you know, the devil's in Chicago. It takes that like one person to start a chain reaction to say, yo, this ain't cool, and there's another way to do it. But everybody's just stuck in that right now in Chicago, right?
You know, especially there, you know, you get the rows that grew from the concrete.
Right.
You get a few of those guys, but it's tough in that environment because you know the lack of education. Right, they strip the education in those places, and then they fill those places with guns and drugs. So when you create that hostile environment, there's no education at the seed level, and then they're filling. You know, there's guns and drugs in there.
Right.
It's tough to create an environment that's conducive to growth. And so even if you are that rose in the concrete, you know, that whoever that rose in the concrete is that gets out, you know, you'll look at them and you'll be able to see what they went through just by looking at them.
And there's only so much that one person could do. Like it actually takes some bread to make that stuff happen, right? So if somebody with actual money came in and started establishing, and not just like giving people stuff, but like made another way where somebody can, like $100,000 a year shouldn't be a lot for anybody because there's so much money out there. You know what I mean? So if there was ways for people to get real jobs, like real employment, real money, then maybe they would think, oh, I don't actually have to do that. But when everything is poverty line, like everywhere you work, is not going to get you anywhere else. It's like, why would I bother? Let me just slang some stuff. You know what I mean? Let me go rob somebody, whatever. Because I can actually eat now and I can actually feed people now, right? So there's not really any outlets for these people, right?
Right. No. And like I was talking to Joe about earlier, you know, that there's a prison to pipeline concept, and I went to a school in Chicago on the west side called Crane. And the infrastructure is built as a prison. There was a police station on the bottom floor.
Wow.
This is in school.
Wow.
And we had security guards in our classroom.
Wow.
So it just was an environment conducive to learning. And, you know, you look now that I'm outside looking back in, I could see that, man, like, you know, that sort of environment, there's, you know, it kind of conditions you for prison. You know?
Yeah.
So it's hard to kind of go against the grain, especially when education is stripped out. You're in an environment that's sort of conditioning you to go a specific pathway.
Right.
It's hard to kind of beat those odds. But yeah, you know, it takes a community to sort of fix a lot of those issues, and I'm hopeful.
Yeah, and I think even, you know, we were talking a little bit about your book, and part of it is ultimately education.
Yeah.
And I always use this term, you know, that knowledge is a precursor to transformation. So everything has to start with some level of knowledge. And so if a person is not educated, understands that something is possible. That's
it,
all knowledge is that it tells you that something is possible. I read this little book for my kids. It's about this kid in Africa where there's a drought, and it's based on a true story. It's this kid who actually learned how to build a well, and everybody was obviously, there's a drought, and so they can't farm. And he's hungry, and the family can't. They don't have any crops, and so they're praying to the gods, essentially, for the rains to come, but the rains are not coming. But this kid remembered that there was a library, and so he started going to the library with an empty stomach. Wow. And he picked up a book.
Let's drive.
It's not drive, eh? And he starts to read this book, and he starts to learn about windmills. Starts to learn about electricity, and realizes that, wow, I can create power. I can generate. Starts to learn a little bit about wells.
Right.
So he takes this book and he goes out into the community and he's going to build it. He wants to be able to generate some electricity and some water.
So it's interesting because it's like when I grew up with like a single mom. Like there's at one point I had a stepdad that came around, but he worked night shifts and that was not involved in my life whatsoever. I still consider it almost like a single mom. Like it was, you know what I mean? But she had her own problems too. So I never had that nurture or that care or somebody telling me what I could be or the options that were there, right? And without the options that are there, and as a little kid, I have a brother 6 years older than me, okay? He brought rap music in the house. And again, like everything was unsupervised in my house. There was zero supervision. So I'm bumping Tupac, Eminem, Snoop Dogg, the Doggy Style album. Like that grew up on that stuff when I was less than 10 years old. You feel me? And so those guys became my role models, my father figures. And that's what I was taught because nobody taught me anything else. So I'm picking up a quarter of weed to sell at 12 years old. And that's where it all started, right? Like a million things happen at 12 years old to me that should never happen to anybody. You know what I mean? And from there, it's like, well, it's like a quarter, then it's an ounce, then it's Coke, then it's pills, because all the other kids are around, you know what I mean? And it's whatever I get my hands on to make money. My mind state, and plus I don't even know if you can get a job at 12 years old, but no social insurance number, nothing. So it's like, but I started smoking weed at 12 and I want to get my weed. So I'm like, how do I do that? Well, I've already learned how to do that through the music, right? And so from there, it's like, I sold drugs my whole life. You feel me? And because I didn't know any better, like nobody ever taught me better. Nobody ever showed me better. Like the OGs in the neighborhood were bringing me to buy ounces of Coke. Right. You know what I mean? And it was like their credibility, like I was helping their credibility because it's like, oh, we got a youngin' that's slanging for us, right? And so I remember literally, like I would tell people, like if I ever won the lottery, I'd just buy bricks. Like that's where my mind state was because I didn't know any better. And I actually fell in love with what I was doing with zero guilt because again, I didn't know better. There was no reason for me to feel guilty. You know what I mean? And it was only because of God, that long story that happened, but just boom. And I never believed in God before. Then I found God. And then once I acknowledged him, and even though like I really believed in him and I loved him, he saved me at that time. I didn't know his ways. I didn't know nothing about him. So I kept trying to slang. I didn't think it was wrong. But ever since I acknowledged him, like it didn't work again. I couldn't just pick up where I left off like I always did before. And then from there, it's like he taught me everything I needed to know, right? Started reading the Bible, started being around other people, and you take some things from people, you don't take it all from everybody, right? But it was only because God actually saved me and started showing me different that I'm here with these cameras, with all this stuff, like nothing else. So I completely understand if you don't know better and nobody's there to teach you better and nobody's there to show you better. So if that one person that makes it out the hood doesn't come back and show them it's possible, yo, look, I was just like you. I was toting guns, I was slanging, I was doing everything you're doing, but look at me. Look at me. And then people are like, whoa, it's possible. They don't know.
They can
have
touch
no idea.
Feel you. They see it's real.
And it's so important.
Just touching on that. Like it's hard to do better when you don't know better. And you hit it on the nail with that.
If you knew better, you do better, they say, right?
And one of the things that I think I really appreciated about you is your intellectual curiosity. And you've always been this guy that's been for search of truth. We were just talking in the car, and that's when been a motivator for you. So tell me where that curiosity came from, and even in relationship to the book that you've written now, you know, how you essentially are combining two loves, which is a basketball, which is you're married to, your primary love. 20 years, you know, it's a long time.
Yeah.
You know, it's giving you a lot of good things, and it's also giving you bad knees. It's
the good and the bad.
Good and the bad of it, like any relationship. But also now you have this, you know, you were into money. It's like learning about wealth creation and all that stuff has been a big part of your journey too.
Yeah.
So how did you come into, welding these two things together?
Well, it started early actually. So this is like a full circle moment. I know you, when I was a kid, you gave me my first book, and it was a business book. And at the time I was probably about 15.
Yeah. And
a lot of the material in that book was, for me, you know, coming from my educational background, you know, it was tough to comprehend. It was, you know, it was a lot more complicated for me at that age. I revisited that book years later, and I was like, okay, some of these principles were fundamental. I've just always been the kid that was like, why? Mm-hmm. You know, I'd sit in class and the teacher would try to, like, you know, teach us, you know, give us a concept or whatnot. And this is how you do it. It's like this. And I'd just be like, but why? and it would drive some people nuts. I don't know why. That's just the way it is. Just do it like this. And I'm just like, but I need to know why. Like, I just had that, like, that curiosity from the jump. And that curiosity has led me into some troubled places, but it's also led me to, like, inventions or like creations and whatnot.
Yeah, I don't think that thing is a bad thing at all.
Yeah.
Like that's never a bad thing. Like my kids are like that.
Okay.
Why? And sometimes I'm like, why you always got to question me? You know what I'm saying? But because homeschooling, right? I know that answering that why just gives them knowledge. And even if it's something you think is pointless, doesn't matter. Like teach that kid, take the time. And if you don't know why, go research it with them. I just learned that from my buddy Jamal. He's like, if you don't know why and your kids are asking why, don't just say just because. Just because, say, you know what, let's go research that together. Right. Let's go figure it out, you know?
Right. Yeah. And also, like, the world is so vast, and I've come to terms with, you know, the reality that I don't know much. Mm-hmm. I don't know much at all. In fact, I'm learning every day, and I make a lot of mistakes. So for me, it's like, you know, constantly like, oh, okay, well, learning more and, you know, finding out different things. And that's sort of kind of been like my new pastime, especially with reading. But, you know, basketball was sort of like my first love. And then after I hurt my knee, I had to find, you know, I had to transition. I had to find like a new playground. And for me, that was business. And the reason why was because I realized that there were a lot of transferable skills from the court to the boardroom or the business game.
Like what? Can you give an example?
Yeah. Well, business is very competitive, right? You're in an industry, you're in a market. You have competitors. You have to analyze your competitors, and team dynamics, right? You put a team together. You have to put a winning team together. So understanding personnel, you know, who's good at what's his strengths, his weaknesses.
What position we're going to put them in.
What position are we going to put them in? You know, how will he excel in that? Like, will he excel in that position?
Is he a Shaq or is he a Steve Curry?
Is he a Shaq or Steve Kerr? You know, is he going to run the plays? You know? So that was that kind of that competitive environment translated really well.
So you're into business right now. That's kind of your thing.
Yeah. So
it's funny. He gave you a book about business at the beginning.
Yeah, at the beginning. And so
Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
See how that works, though?
Yeah, it's crazy.
As a kid, that's planted in you, and that becomes part of your DNA.
Yeah, it's unreal.
And it might not be activated until later in life, but so long as it's been planted, even as a youth, it'll do something later on.
Yeah, and then here I am with my first book, you know, business finance book for kids, sitting with the man who, you know, so that kind of stuff is like, it's surreal. Those are the kind of things that make me say why to everything, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's all connected. I think so.
It is.
I'm getting goosebumps.
You get kind of goosebumps and all that stuff. So, yeah, no. And I studied finance and business in university. at 2014, and then after that, I became an active investor in the stock market. And I did well early on. Part of that was due to like just luck, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Yeah.
Right.
And then I was like, oh, I'm pretty good at this. And then I had found out after I did more reading and learning that I'm not really good at that. I was just super lucky. And then
But sometimes I think like more, and then the book sometimes locks you into something.
That's true.
That's not good.
That's true
You feel
too.
me?
Sometimes you could just be a natural and
Yeah.
instincts, and you could pick up on things like, oh, that's going to be a good business.
Yeah.
Right.
And I can foresee it. And then you start reading the material and the context, you're like, oh my God, I'm an idiot.
But if it's doing well, then
But if it's doing well, right?
That's
So you
arguable.
can try to find that balance, the qualitative and the quantitative.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So what's like in business, like in that business sector, what's your like what interests you the most?
It's a great question. You guys have asked really good questions on this podcast.
Yeah.
Watching a company grow from some of like the the growth level, seeing how they interact with their competitors, and just the competition. You know, you go on the media, you see the battles between the Facebooks and the Googles and the Apple and Amazons and those same sort of competitive battles are happening in the sports world as well. And that kind of environment is intriguing.
Yeah. So is this what the book is really about? Is that you somehow managed to relate what you've learned on the court?
So with this book specifically, what I tried to do, the goal was to take complicated financial concepts and simplify it in a way that's engaging and fun for the kids to comprehend and understand. Because for me, from the age of like 17 to now, I've made so many personal finance mistakes. And I wish, like, looking back in hindsight, had I known half of what I know today, I would have been far better off. So for me, looking back, like he said, you gotta go back to the hood and kind of show them the way. Being the OG now, so for me, that was kind of the thing where, okay, well, how can I help all these kids, the next generation, kind of, bypass or, kind of maneuver around those traps and those holes from a personal finance perspective. And that was the goal and the mission behind this thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I mean, I'm a child of two loving immigrant parents who, they fled Africa due to war and found refuge here and gave us everything they have. We never had to really need for anything. So they kind of elevated us to that next level, and that's basically what I'm trying to do now is kind of, take that and build upon it and help the next generation move forward.
And that's so powerful because it is true, the first generation,
Yeah.
their job is simply to work their tail off.
Yeah.
It's funny because we have a lot of symmetry in our lives in the sense both our parents drove a cab because that's what they had to do to, provide for us as a family, working 14, 16-hour days.
Yeah.
But then we have the education, we have the training, we have the knowledge. So as a second generation, we now have an opportunity to really build a legacy for our kids and for the rest of those that come after us. And so there's a huge responsibility because I was thinking about this too, and you and I were talking about this in the car. I think you were born here in Canada.
Yeah.
I was born in Africa, Eritrea. And so for me, I've always had this kind of a identity issue in the sense of trying to figure out, who really am I in the sense of because I was rooted somewhere and then got uprooted and came here and assimilated to that culture. And it's just now that I think in later years that I'm starting to actually reintegrate back into my culture.
Right.
Before, I didn't really want nothing to do with it. For you, you were born here.
Yeah, I was born here.
But like the way they say it is that, you didn't have to go to Africa because Africa was with you every day.
So it's like one of those what's the saying? You know, you go back home and you know, you don't really feel like you belong.
Yeah.
Yet you come here and you still kind of don't really feel like you belong. And it's always been one of those things. Like, yeah, I was born here, I grew up here, grew up in the traditions, the customs, the Canadian traditions, customs. But I always did feel like, you know, I was like displaced a little, and I just wasn't really from here. But you always had that sense of like, oh, something's missing, you know. But my parents did a good job of, you know, implementing a lot of those cultural norms and making sure that, you know, with the food and the music and the, you know, the style, that, you know, we keep that culture embedded in us. And a lot of those things, those cultural traditions have helped us propel with our careers, with our sports careers, whether it be, you know, whatever you do.
Yeah.
That resiliency, you know, it's helped a lot. But yeah, I find now more so, because I don't really speak the language.
Yeah.
So just trying to like learn more things about, you know, Eritrea and.
You from Eritrea?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have my friend from Eritrea. His name's Tech. You ever heard of Teklai?
Oh, I know Teklai.
You know Teklai?
Yeah, I know Tech.
That's my boy.
I love it. It's like, I know Teklai.
Yeah, I know Tech. We actually went to high school together.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Small world.
You same age as him? Like same grade?
No, I think Tech might be 2 years older.
Right. Yeah.
He might be 2 years older. Yeah.
Wow.
He started getting into filmmaking. You know about that?
Yeah, he's been doing that, and
I edited his whole documentary.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I
the one
remember
between
it.
Eritrea and don't say it. Not Somalia.
Ethiopia.
Eritrea and Ethiopia. I knew it was another E. I'm like, yeah.
There's a lot going on back home.
Yeah, I know. Right
too,
now,
and,
especially.
Yeah. So, and I know he's been in that space right now as far as the politics going on back home. So,
Yeah.
no, small world.
Yeah, because his pops is involved in the politics or something like that too, right? I don't know. I think so. I thought you might know, but
So that's interesting though. Because I find it interesting, because that's been the challenge of my life, in the sense of dissociating who I am from my history, and understanding and valuing, because we talked about this earlier in the car. Like when I came here, you know, it was in the 80s. For example, the only black population that was here was predominantly Jamaicans, and so
not in Brockville. You were the only one.
Yes, Brockville. I don't count that. I was just kind of like, you know, there was no black people there. But coming to Ottawa, like my best friend growing up, Dwight, Jamaican.
Yeah.
And so for me, the culture that had the greatest amount of influence was most of the West Indian culture, and also whatever I watched on like the LA Lakers and Chicago Bears, my favorite basketball team, and also football team. Those are the things that were influencing me. So I didn't understand until now the rich heritage that I carried, and the very people. It's funny because years later I was playing for the Rockers. This is a Jamaican soccer team here locally, the premier team. And as soon as they found out that I was from Eritrea, they didn't care. I'm Ethiopian to them.
Yeah.
I was like put on a pedestal, you know? I was it. And it hit me as I'm playing. I'm thinking, these people have deified this dude as a god.
Oh, yeah.
Because for them, it's so important to be rooted in history, that to be able to say I'm from somewhere. So for me, I was devaluing the very thing so many people in black people specifically, whether it's in Canada, United States, that were valuing. They were talking about, you know, the motherland and all that stuff. And for me, I had this negative association because of the narrative that you see in the news, you know, poverty and famine and world.
But also like what your mom drilled into you too, right? There was something about how your mom, I think she said that like, you're not black or something. What was it? That you're just...
Well, I was saying this to Henock earlier. It's just, I think for them, for our parents specifically, they don't look at the world through the lens of their color, because that's what the majority are. Everybody's quote unquote black. That's not something you think through. You don't think
But what if
through.
you've seen a white person?
you would think of them as an outsider. So for us, the Italians had colonized us, so we were well accustomed to seeing white people, and culturally it influenced it in regards to even a lot of even our language. I don't know how to say fork in my native, but I say forchetta, which is Italian.
Wow,
which is kind of funny. Piatti,
and your style's Italian too, the way you dress.
In Tigrinya, but so so the influence that the Italians had is huge. So. For us, we were well aware, but we recognized that they had come and imposed their culture. We didn't necessarily invite it.
Right.
You know, that's what a colonial power does. However, I think what the challenge for me is that to find that pride in who you are. And I think when you first show up and you're not the majority, you naturally devalue because what you see in the news is, you know, at the time in the 80s especially, it was all about the famine, you know, we are the world, all that stuff. And so
all about the what, sorry?
The famine, because there was a huge famine back home because of the war and all the stuff that was happening. And so you see that, you're like, I want nothing to do with it. Because you don't understand your history in the context of your history, even though your parents tell you. It's only later on as you reflect back and you start to study that you go, whoa, dude, I'm proud.
Right.
So I guess the question I was asking you is, how have you navigated that here? Yeah,
especially because there's not many of us here, right? So, it's always easier, when you find a community of the same sort of people to sort of help you navigate through that new reality or the new realities. I think it's been more challenging as of late, just because I've become a lot more involved in politics, and you start to like peel the layers back and realize because before I was in the athletic culture, the basketball world, kind of creates a bubble and you don't really get exposed to a lot of that. You're just a basketball player, that's what you do, that's who you are. And then as you venture out and you start to learn different things about politics, about your history and all that stuff, and it's constantly wrestling with new realities. But like you, I've come to have a sense of pride about it. This is who I am. And like I said, Eritreans have certain characteristics about them that sort of make them stand out. And I'm proud of those characteristics.
Yeah, it's true, right?
Yeah.
And we're incredibly resilient people, for example. And even one of the things that made me really proud of my history is even with the 30-year war with Ethiopia. Eritrea was one of the first probably countries in the world where the female were actually in the front lines fighting.
Yeah.
And when we look at our moms, our sisters, one of the, most people talk about feminism in Western society. But I always say to people, we had that long before you ever had, any household. The woman runs the household, really, at the end of the day. The men are present, but the role of a woman is so vital and so huge.
Right.
And it's really fascinating. So sometimes when people in the Western society start talking about, look, the feminism and all that stuff, and I'm like, dude, we've had that for a long time. And
I think it's also a different kind of what you quote unquote feminism. I don't like that word. I'm not a fan of the word, but I think that it's two. Even if you use it in the same word, it's two different things. How women are strong in other countries and how women attempt to be strong in the Western world. It's two completely different things. Am I right to say that?
I'd say perfect. I don't know. Let him talk. He's got two sisters.
It's funny because I think I've seen a clip on TikTok.
Yeah.
And it was girls from here that grew up here, and I guess there was a time where everyone thought we were going into World War III. And then it was all the feminists were like, oh, no, actually, I want to be in the kitchen. I want to be in the kitchen now.
Easy.
It's oh, you don't want to go to war, eh?
Well,
no.
Here we go.
This is what you signed up for.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm also not really well versed in like the social spaces as well. So I'm kind of learning in that regards too, kind of like learning about social dynamics, social politics as well. So it's interesting. A lot of it is interesting.
Yeah, it is fascinating how all that. But at the end of the day, I think what I've learned is in life, anyways, in general, there's two things. There is what I would call like resident dignity, that every person, no matter who they are, where they're from, we all have that dignity, and we're deserving of to be treated equally.
Right.
The difference is, and I understand this more and more, that if somebody has been victimized for a long time, then the natural tendency is to impose their rights because their rights have been quashed for a long time. And so there is this outspokenness. And so sometimes I think in Western society, one of the things that I've learned, I guess, having been here a long time, is that type of authority is usually it's imposed. And so you see that even within the feminist movement, let's say in Western society. It's fascinating when you think like, it was Hillary Clinton, actually, I remember, was talking about feminism in Africa. And that brand of feminism is just not received well in Africa because African women by nature have always had that dignity.
Right.
And so so sometimes there is this cultural assumptions that you make just because you're from quote unquote third world country that you don't. But what I've seen and witnessed in my own household or my sisters, and usually, and this, I don't know, this is not fact-based, it's more anecdotal. So it's based on my observation. But in my culture, what I've witnessed is that the women actually do much better than the men. And like even from like my two sisters, and we can use your two sisters as great examples. They have this level of what it is. It's this foundation and resolute. I think they've had an easier time, and this might be very like
controversial.
I might be wrong because it's anecdotal. It's not like I went and interviewed whatever.
Every family or whatever.
But just based on my history and the people that I've walked with, it seems like the women tend to have a better foundation, I guess, a better sense of identity and who they are, and which tend
leads them into more success.
I think so. They tend to do well educationally, especially. I've seen that, and I don't know if that might be wrong.
To touch on that, because I've seen like people talk about like cultural differences, right? So, they talk about how Black people in the States have a heart, right? And the stats depict that.
Right.
But then if you take what's the word? It's like I think it's first generation immigrants or second generation immigrants. Okay, so you take Black people that just came from wherever else to the States, they do really well. Like the stats are there. Whenever they come from somewhere else and it's first or second generation, they grind, they work hard, and somehow their success rate is like drastically high. Whereas now you get third, fourth generation, and that's where things start to change. So it's a cultural thing. It's not a race thing. It's more of a cultural thing, right? Because it's the Western culture that is so poisonous, in my opinion. Because like I grew up as what you would think sometimes in the States, the typical Black person would grow up with the single mom, you know what I mean, and the hip hop and the drug dealing, like all of that young, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm part of this culture, you know what I'm saying? And that's what raised me, was this hip hop music and stuff, right? But again, just to reiterate, it's when they come from another country and it's first and second generation, they're doing really well. Like Nipsey, for example, right? Like Nipsey was doing really good, you know what I'm saying? And he was only the second generation. Like he came from Eritrea. Right? Came from Eritrea. His parents came here, and then he was born here, grinded, worked, and super successul. Right?
Yeah. I think Nipsey's half, so his pops is from back home. His mom was American. But yeah, it definitely is a cultural thing. With regards to our women, like I think I don't know, like don't quote me on this, but the statistics as far as the demographics go, Black women might be the most educated group right now, and that number is constantly rising. they're the double minority. So I think they
being women and being black, right?
Right. So they, you know, it's almost like they use that to their advantage as far as, you know, having that chip on their shoulder, and it just gives
the driver. Yeah,
it just drives them even more. But yeah, they wear a lot of different hats, and they do a lot of incredible things for sure.
Yeah, and it's also part of it. Often is, this is just, you know, again, like say my brother and I, the standards, like from our parents' point of view, was like the girls had really high, like there was expectations that were put on them. You know, they really were. I always say to people, I had 3 moms. I tell that to everybody. I had 3 moms because that was ingrained in them early on. And so that leadership that is established early on just keeps growing. And so there's this sense of responsibility, big picture to the family. I think for guys to some extent, and this is especially in black culture as a whole, the role of father, you know, the absentee dad, and not having that. And I always say, you know, as a mother can teach you a lot. But a dad gives you something that is very difficult for a mom to give, which is the confidence to be the man that you are and to really take ownership and responsibility. So
well,
for
a
me,
female can't teach you how to be a man.
No,
right?
I think for me, I look at my dad and I wish I'd paid attention more to and what he was modeling, his work ethic and his commitment to family, his understanding of money. That how he can take something so little and multiply it, and continue to grow it because he understood restraint. He understood that he didn't have to go to Tim Hortons.
Delayed gratification.
Yeah, like things like that. Like I would see him every morning, get up really early. You know, he was up at 3 a.m. and he'd get his breakfast, like, you know, eat his breakfast, his lunch, everything. So he wasn't out there, you know, drinking coffee and this and this and that. Everything that he made, he brought to the household and had the foresight. And that's amazing. But for me, because I was being influenced by the culture, rather than allowing my father to influence me, I allowed the culture to influence me. And the culture, unfortunately, you know.
And you went down a pretty negative path.
Well,
because I'm looking at you now and like you're the second generation of immigrant parents, right? And you're doing well, but it came with the struggle first.
It didn't have to be. I didn't have to spend my 20s. Like, I think you and I, this is why you wrote this book, is the fact that you're 30 now. So we were talking about what it feels like to be 30.
Right.
And I think
32, same age,
yeah,
by
the
way.
20s for most people, and I'm witnessing this even with some friends that have kids that are, you know, turning 20 and stuff like that. That's when a lot of the issues that have been suppressed come to the surface. Unresolved trauma and whatever it might be.
Even lack of attention, whatever, all the things that were lacking growing up.
So you're, you know, going to high school doesn't prepare you for how to handle life. I might have had this. I had an intellectual understanding, but it didn't seep into my mind to the point where I was like, okay, this is how money works and this is what I should be doing. Even though I was around it all the time, like I saw my parents, how they were operating. You know, they were never in debt. They always used cash. All those things, they were modeling for me.
Right.
But for whatever reason, it wasn't getting to me.
Right.
It wasn't latching on.
Yeah. My father was, my dad, he was really the structure for me. He provided me that structure on the blueprint on how to be a man. And but the culture did have a huge influence on me. And part of that was because I spent most of my time.
There you go.
In the culture, outside, right? I think, what is it? It ends up being like you spend 70% with friends in your environment versus the 30% with home.
Right.
But you know, my parents came here, didn't speak a lick of English, didn't have any money in their pockets. But what they were able to accomplish, I think when you asked me where did that drive come from, I think it was watching the way my pops worked.
So true.
And that work ethic you know, I was able to like, you know, take some of that, and my mom too, you know, they made it happen.
Yeah.
Given what they had, like they made something out of nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of taking that.
Can you describe some of your pops' work ethic, like what you've seen?
My pops would, like he said, he'd work 2 jobs. You know, he'd be a cab driver during the day, and then he'd go clean at night.
Right.
And
to make sure the family was good, right?
Yeah, to make sure there was food on the table.
Yeah,
you know, whatever we needed, it's on him.
Yeah.
And you know, he would go clean places, and to the point where he'd even get on his knees to scrub some things. Right. Seeing that, you know, it does. It puts a fire in you to, like, you know, try to realize your potential and thrive, because they had to survive. So now it's your turn to thrive, right? So
nowadays, imagine somebody working 2 jobs, like in our generation. Yeah, like never in your life will you see that, bro.
Right, and what you're
they hit the welfare quick before they do that.
What you're seeing a lot now too, more with our generation, is a lot more people are starting to do what they're passionate about, and you know, unfortunately, you know, my parents' generation, they weren't given the luxury of doing what they love, so to speak, right? Their passions. They had to just provide.
There's more of a cushion now for us.
There's a lot more of a cushion, you know, and so, yeah.
It's funny when you tell that story of your dad having 2 jobs, because I don't know if you knew this, but when I was in high school, for a summer, no, it wasn't even a summer, for 2 weeks, I worked for your uncle.
Okay.
Cleaning at Sears.
Yeah, they got a cleaning conglomerate going on.
So here I was having to show up at, like, I don't know, it was 10 o'clock, whatever it is. And
at night, right? When everything's closed. Yeah.
And you're locked in there for the night.
Right.
And I remember having my Walkman and cleaning toilets. And dude, I lasted 2 weeks. 2 weeks. That was the end of me. I was just like, I can't do this, because, you know, during the day, what do I have to do? I got to sleep.
Right.
And
you're just done.
I was so tired. I was so exhausted.
How old were you?
I was a high school kid, so I don't know.
15, maybe 14.
A little older, maybe 16 whatever it was. But the point was that what they had to do and what they had to endure and overcome. Right. It's incredible. And that's on top of all the cultural pressures that because it's not their home. They left home where they actually were somebody, where they had family, they had friends. And so there they are. And really all they're doing, and that's a level of love. Yeah. Like, I'm a dad of 3 kids now. And so for me, every day, someone asked me, says, where does that work ethic come from? Where does that hustle come from? I said, my dad. That work ethic, all the way, my sisters, they're both psychotherapists. Man, their work ethic is through the roof. My brother, like, dude, like, he's a manager at Brown's, gonna give him some pops. But his work ethic. And you're right. And that is the one thing, definitely. I always said to somebody, I'll never go poor, because my dad taught me how to work.
You know what's funny about this is what's making me think is this is the difference between actually having your father in your home and not. Because my mom worked super hard. Like, she was that 2 jobs, like nonstop working. But there was a lack of respect that I had from mom. I remember growing up, like, all my friends, like, loved their mom. They had this certain level of respect for their mom. You guys both know what I'm talking about, because you probably have the same feeling towards her. I never had that. I never understood it. I never like loved my mom like that. You know what I mean? And it's because my dad wasn't there, right? But even my dad is one of the hardest working people I've ever met in my life. But he was not around my whole life. Like, I would see him maybe twice a year or something, right? But my parents got remarried when I was like 20 years old, after they were divorced when I was 3 or 4 or something. It's nuts how God worked everything out together. And then we all found God together same time. It's cool. And so, like, now I'm starting to develop, even just still, I'm developing that kind of work ethic that I didn't have before, because I'm actually witnessing it now. And I have honor for my parents now, right? That I never had before. But growing, like, even though that work ethic was there from my mom, and I mean, even just the way she would clean the whole house after she'd be working 2 jobs, like, nonstop, right? It never translated to me.
Interesting.
Because my dad wasn't there that's what I was thinking about when I'm hearing both you guys say, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even though you didn't pay attention, you know, at the time, it's there now, right? That you have it.
Yeah.
And you say you'll never go poor because your dad taught you how to work, right?
Yeah.
Whereas me, it was like selling drugs because it was easy.
Yeah.
I didn't want to work.
Yeah.
Man, I remember working certain jobs. Like when I was at home, my mom would force me to get a job. It'd be like 2 weeks, just like you're saying. I'd be stocking shelves at Farm Boy for 2 weeks while my phone's ringing for stuff. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing here, right?
Yeah.
I don't need to work hard. I need to get out there. And I would lie about going to work.
Yeah.
And I'd just be out because like you even said, 70% of our time is with our friends. So I'd always be just kicking with my friends anyways.
Right.
Just kept slanging. I didn't want to work hard. It was just not in me, man.
Yeah, that's so good. And part of it is like, now I know better. And so even with my kids, one of the things that I'm trying to instill with them is the value of family. So, you know, things, but intentionality in teaching them. So when we're sitting at the breakfast table, I'm always there at 7 o'clock. We're eating together as a family. You know, we have our prayer time together. I was talking to neighbor kids, and they're like, "Oh, the Marathas have their prayer, you know, and then Sundays is family day, which means that they can't go out and play with their friends,
Right.
because what we want to do is create a sense of value for family. Friends are great, but you're right. Like, we don't want their friends to be the primary influencers in their lives.
Right.
They can go play with them. But I think with our families, when they're working so hard to try to make ends meet for us, they don't have that luxury.
Right.
My dad didn't have the luxury of going to the soccer games, hanging out. I mean, you know that.
Yeah.
Your dad didn't have the luxury to sit there and going, "Hey, no."
Yeah.
He was loving you
Yeah.
because he's out there working.
Yeah. He would drive me all around the city to whatever practice I had to go to. But once he dropped me off, he was working. You know. And
Wow.
Yeah. I was.
But he still made the effort though to drive you to like all those places all the time.
Even when I was in Chicago, you know, again, anything like pops, I need paperwork done from here to here. He was on it.
Wow.
And I was one of those fortunate few that like was blessed to get like the balance of like, you know, my father's structure and then my mother's like sort of nurturing ways.
Yeah.
So I consider myself blessed in that regards, and
you can see the difference in your life compared to other people that didn't have that, right?
Absolutely, yeah,
Right.
yeah. You know, and it like things work out in mysterious ways, right? So it's like some people who didn't have one parent end up being very successful because of that void, and that is what drove them, right?
Yeah.
No,
So,
it's true.
But you do see though that like, oh, okay, I see, you know,
Like an average. If we're gonna look for an average, it's like
Oh yeah,
yeah, for sure.
You never want to use the exception as the rule.
No,
right.
you're right.
That's the good point. Yeah.
But there are, for every LeBron James,
There's like,
Right.
yeah, you're absolutely right.
millions of others. But the point I think you're making, which is really good, is when you have it good, and I think in a culture sometimes where you're trying to to find the excuse for why you're not succeeding,
Right.
sometimes you can blame people who
It's easy.
It's easy, you know. Mom and dad didn't do A, B, and C, when in reality, mom and dad have sacrificed everything. And so there's a point where you have to take personal responsibility and say, okay, what am I doing with the opportunity that I've been afforded?
Right. And to go back to one of our first points at the starting of this is if they knew better, they'd do better, right? So sometimes our parents are just doing all they know and they're doing the best they can.
Right.
And so now it's your job to take that, but also continue to learn and continue to apply yourself so that when you have kids that you do better than your parents did because you know better at this point, right? But it's, again, if they knew better, they would do better. So it's all forgiveness, all love, and all grace to your parents. You can't carry that, and you can't blame them at this point, especially when you're a grown man. You know what I mean? It's like now it's time to figure things out and do it the right way with no resentment towards your parents, right?
No, appreciation.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, with everything progresses, right? So generations tend to, that's what happens is they get better.
Yeah.
I you know, with my nieces and nephews, you could probably attest to this with your kids, but like, they're brilliant.
I know.
And it's like scary brilliant. Because it's like, you know, they're like 4, 5, and 6, and they're playing cards already. And I'm coming in to try to like interact with them, and they're teaching me this new card game that they created, and I'm learning the rules to the games, and so
It's different.
Yeah, so there's just things get better as
well. It's the concept of biblically this idea of glory to glory, or the blessings go not to just the second but the third. And I was realizing that sometimes because we're so, it's like anything, you can't see the tree from the forest because you're too close to it.
Right.
And so sometimes this is why I think prayer, meditation, all that stuff is so important, because what it does is allows you to actually remove yourself from life, and you just look, you observe.
Right.
That's why when you pray, like, be still and know that I'm God, the idea that stillness is to acknowledge, to know. Sometimes we don't acknowledge what we have. And when you don't acknowledge what you have, you're always like complaining. Right. You're never really thankful.
It's interesting because like everything is always moving, like nonstop. The world is spinning if you believe it's a globe. If it's not, then the sun is spinning, whatever. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's everything is always in motion.
Right.
So when you be still and know God is God, it's like you just removed yourself from everything and you become the observer instead of just being part of the circus, So when you're still and you literally you still your thoughts and everything, you can really see things clearly at that point, right? And yeah, man.
And it's powerful. Go ahead.
It takes a lot of people to get to that level of enlightenment, And I think for me, I've started to realize that a lot of people just don't have that yet. They haven't gotten there. Right. They haven't waken up and like just stopped and like assess their environment, what's actually really going on.
They're caught up in the cycles.
Caught up in the mix. They're too in the mix, right?
Yeah.
And they don't want to leave the mix. So yeah, like meditation is powerful, right?
Yeah.
Well, that sometimes it takes that, like that for me, I was caught up in the mix and it took that like crazy car accident. Like, so many things happened that night. Like it was so divine that I'm like, I got home like, I was not alone. And it shook me up to really take a look at things and to observe things and to say like, okay, there's something more here. Instead of like, but instead you're just caught up in the cycle the whole time. You never remove yourself from it because you're just going downstream. You're caught up in the wave. You're caught up in the whatever, the tide. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You have no choice until something just slams you. And usually that's what it takes for most of us, at least. Unless there's that one person that goes back to the hood or whatever, or wherever it is, you know what I mean? Even to like a successful family that might be good, but they're caught up in this cycle. Nobody thinks about what's actually important. So then, you'll have a generation of children that end up messed up when the parents were good and the parents like, we did everything we were supposed to. But they're all caught up in this constant loop and this cycle of stuff until something drastic happens, right?
Yeah, and like the crash and that crash happens, and I think what happens is a lot of people don't realize that, they're vulnerable to their own blind spots, and that's kind of what the whole purpose was behind the book is I had so many blind spots that a lot of these kids are going to have due to lack of education, due to lack of those resources. So I basically tried to take all of those blind spots and put it in a book form so that they could use it as a tool to sort of navigate their way through the system, through the game.
Can you share a piece of the book right now?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah, this is good.
Wow. I'll share a piece that most people find, even people who are like my age and older,
helpful. Yeah.
So I don't know if you see, but there's a chalkboard.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah,
a penny doubles.
A penny doubled every day, and so there's a question that's posed in the financial world: is would you rather have $1 million today, or a penny that doubled every day for the 30 days? Most people who are not, educated in the financial world would take the $1 million today. But if you could see on the chalkboard, a penny that doubles every day ends up being over 5 million in 30 days.
In 30 days?
In 30 days. And that's the power of compound interest.
Penny.
Yeah. So I don't know if you can see, it's pretty small.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see the small writing, but you can see the chalkboard.
So on day 1, it's like a penny. On day 2, it's 2 pennies. By the time it hits day 15, it's like 16,000.
Oh, and then it just 32,
doubled.
60.
Right.
Compound interest. Yeah.
And so it goes, hey, baller boy, would you care to see a magic trick? If you take a penny and it doubles every day, you'd have $5 million in just 30 days. Isn't that a great return on your investment?
Amazing.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so that's the power of compound interest, and you know, creditors use that to their advantage. That's why, you know, you can get a credit card and you don't realize, but you know, you spent this some amount of money, and then all of a sudden you've been paying that sum for quite some time.
Yeah.
And that's the power of compound interest.
And then they had like a million people doing that same thing, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's either working for you or against you.
Yeah.
And
well, that's why you got to leverage credit if you have it, right? So I mean, understanding the game, it's like, yeah, okay, maybe they're getting stuff out of me, but what am I using that credit for, right? So if I'm taking that credit and I'm paying a bit of interest on it, but if that credit is like, if I'm investing that into something that's tripling my money, for example, then I'm doing all right. I'm not just being a consumer with that credit.
No, absolutely. Right? But a lot of those kids don't understand those fundamental principles.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's why I tried to introduce it to them at an early age, because I think it's important, because, you know, instead of having to go through 2 or those 3 credit cards where you have to cut them up, you know, and then you learn like, oh, okay.
Right.
This is how you play the game.
But that was one benefit of growing up selling drugs, is I didn't have no credit cards, nothing under my name. Whereas when I went to go get a credit card, the bank manager asked me if I was new to the country, bro. You know what I mean? So I had like a deal. And like when I have my credit card at a certain level, my point jumps like 60, 70 points on my credit score because I have nothing hanging, right? Whereas in this society, in the Western world, it's like 18 years old, boom, they're getting their first credit card and they're using it to go party.
Right? I got my first credit card when I was in university.
Right.
And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Free $1,000?
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah.
Well, OSAP. Same deal.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you get OSAP in university and you're just like, okay, I got this extra.
Yeah.
No, you don't.
No, you don't. And that's the problem, is that, you know, the education system by design doesn't teach you how to handle money.
Right.
No.
And that's the key.
Yeah.
So the difference, you know, I've worked with some amazing financial advisors, and one of the key things that they always talk about is, you know, if you look at the wealthy, their kids, the first thing that they do is they educate them about the power of money and the game. It is a game ultimately. And I love the fact that that's how you're illustrating money. Money is a game, and every game has a set of rules.
Right.
So if you understand those rules and you apply them, then you can create wealth.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, we've had a few people talking about money specifically.
Right.
And one of the components is like really understanding the value of money and also changing our relationship to money. And I think what you're doing, which is kind of cool, is I was thinking about this. You're trying to save Henock when he was just entering university, you know, just so that before you get yourself in trouble, you now understand. Like that's my dream. Is I tell my kids, you know, I want them to understand how money works right now. They're, you know, 5, 7, and 9.
Right.
But they know probably more about money right now than I did
when you were 20. Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Because
anybody watching the podcast, go watch the one with Jolie, number 5.
Yes.
If you want to learn something about money, man. Like she blew my mind.
I think I've seen her. She was the wealth
the Asian lady, right? Bro, she was
spitting gems.
The relationship with money, how she would talk about how like there's good money and there's bad money, money that you love and money that you hate.
Right.
Like you're working at a job that you hate. You don't even like the paycheck that you get.
Right.
Like when that money comes, you hate that money and you spend it stupidly because you don't have a good relationship with that money.
Deep.
It's so deep, man.
Yeah, like there's different concepts, like where, like, you know, some people say that money's a flow. It's a certain type of energy flow.
Yeah.
And, you know, you open yourself.
Let me say this. So they call it currency. Current. Sea.
It's a currency. Yeah.
Currency. Yes.
The current of the sea. It's moving. It's energy. It's in motion. You know.
Yep. Facts. And so, and the younger generation, you know, they're smart. They're brilliant. They have a lot more education, and part of that is due to us giving back and us, you know, teaching them.
Yeah, of course.
But like with the book, you know, there's a lot of underfunded communities that are not getting those resources. Yeah, they're not getting that education. So,
how many how new is this book?
Last week.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we were able to sell 50 copies in a week.
Nice.
So
right from the jump.
We didn't really do like too much marketing. This is probably the biggest promo that we've done so far.
Right.
But yeah, it's on Amazon.
Okay. Is that like where the main place people can buy from?
That's the main place right now.
We'll put a link in the description too, for sure.
Awesome. We're trying to get into the school boards because just like
amazing.
You said,
bro.
I think it's important that, you know, and I know that, you know, the education system, the curriculum, you know, they're not necessarily conditioning those kids to be financially literate.
Right.
But I think it's important, and I think it's only going to help them as well. You know?
School is stuck in like dinosaur mode. Like they're doing it one way, and that's how it is. That's why I have my friend Jamal the poet. He's all about art and stuff like that. Man, he's gotten into that, like the school sector, and just shakes it up so much because he has kids and he did homeschooling and stuff, and he knows what these kids are lacking, right? And just completely like disrupts like stuff, you know what I mean, with this, and the kids are so attentive to him, like because like it's like their soul feels it, you know what I mean. It's like something that they didn't know they needed, but inside they actually needed that, right? And that's like, man, as much as people can bust into the school system with things that are necessary, man, all the power to you, man. You know,
it's amazing.
It's not going to be easy, apparently, but you know, it's worth the
nothing worthwhile is easy, bro.
You're right.
You
it's
know,
that red tape. Point. You know,
I think what excites me about what you're doing in this journey that you're in is this. You know, everything happens for a reason. All the experiences that we have are there for a reason. So the fact that you're able to meld these two passions and create a book, first of all, that's a huge accomplishment. So huge kudos to you.
Thank you.
And now you have a real great opportunity to give back. And so you asked me a quick question earlier, but in the car you said, how are the 30s?
Yeah,
your 30s are going to be incredible. That's how your 30s is going to be.
Thank
because
you found purpose.
Yeah, you found purpose.
You've talked about that, Joe. People want to worry about money. It's like, no, find a purpose, and then the money will come to you. This could be 1 million copies sold. You know what I mean? You get into school, boom, all across Canada. Who knows? You know what I'm saying? Right. But you found a purpose and something that can actually help people, and that's like the driving factor. Right,
it's amazing.
Everything else comes afterwards.
Right.
Yeah, it's incredible. And for me, I think I've been. It's weird because here I am sitting, and it's one of the most surreal experiences you can have is when you've known somebody when they were a tiny little baby, but they've grown into this men. And they're a peer now. And so the way you view life, it's kind of like surreal. That's the only word I can, you start to, so I'm looking at you and I'm thinking, wow, just imagine, like, you know, just how life, first of all, how quickly time passes, but also that all the experiences, all the influences are all like kind of embedded in you, and now they're expressing themselves, whether it's in a book and various other forms. I know he's got an academy right now too. He's doing a basketball academy. So he's teaching people. So it's just, anybody who says sometimes, you know, you look at your life and you're like, well, it didn't go the way it was supposed to.
Right.
And he was telling me this crazy story. Like, I was looking at social media and last summer, and I'm like, what the heck is this guy doing in Brazil? Like, he supposedly went there. Yeah, he went there for his birthday. And then every time I look at social media, it looked like he'd moved there. And he stayed there for 100 days, he told me. And so he did something that's really powerful in the sense that he came back and kind of viewed your life and left corporate Canada and decided, you know what, I want to use this time to kind of just reset, because you've been running for a long time, sports, 20 years, high level.
Like we were talking about earlier, you know, playing basketball for 20 years and, you know, getting run into the ground pretty much. I mean, you're running every day, 4 or 5 hours a day at a high level, you know, taxes on your body. And when I went to Brazil, and I basically lived there for like 3.5 months, it kind of took my Western ideologies and kind of like just ripped them into pieces, because I was never exposed to the third world like that. And you know, you walking on the street and, you know, you see full-on families homeless.
Wow.
You see people with
it's a regular thing, eh?
Yeah, it's a regular thing. Kids are tugging at your leg, you know, for money, and it's a kid, it's a baby. You see a mother holding a baby, nurturing
like a kid shouldn't even think about that stuff.
No, like here you see some homeless folks. Usually they're males, older males.
Almost every time, yeah.
Yeah, but you don't see full-on families. So that kind of is like a...
I've never seen that once because like CES would come pick up that kid before anything else happened. But there's also like women's shelters and stuff like that for women and kids.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right, and there it was just like there was none of that.
Right.
And you would see people with all different sorts of diseases that you've never seen before, like elephantitis and
right. Yeah, you never see that here, not one single time.
Yeah. So, and then just the way of life and the custom there, it kind of like took my Western ideologies and the superficiality behind some of those ideologies, and coming back and reintegrating back into Western society, I was just like, no, you know what? If Brazil taught me anything, it's to take your life, prioritize your life. You know, don't just get caught up in that rat race.
Right.
Because there's
actually
so much,
do something with it.
Do something with it. 'Cause and that's not knocking on anybody who does the job thing, because some people, you know, there are some professions where you're passionate about that, and you excel and you're good at that. And not everybody's an entrepreneur. Not everybody, you know. But for me, it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm not going to just do something anymore because it's quote unquote the right thing to do.
Because you get paid for it or whatever.
They're paying me or the money's good. Before I went to Brazil, I got a pretty good offer in Toronto to be as a senior underwriter. And I turned it down, you know, and I was like, no, because that's not what I want to do.
Right. That's not happy money.
It's not happy money.
Right.
I love it. Happy money. Yeah. And I think we've all learned that lesson. I mean, recently I've made that change too, like going from running marketing campaigns and stuff like that and really realizing what was the motivation behind that. And I had a moment, it was in August actually, where I had an encounter, like a full-on spiritual encounter with God while I was vacationing. And it was
told me about that.
And it really revolutionized the way I was looking at my life. Because sometimes we can always fall back into a survival mindset. That's the default position. I'm realizing that now. The default position is that, the survival, that old brain of ours that
get that money.
You get that money. And so to live, one of the greatest ways I think you can influence culture today is the way you live. And choosing to live by faith or based on your calling and purpose. That speaks louder nowadays than anything else because people have tried fame and money and all that stuff, and it's only
and a job that doesn't make you happy but pays a lot, right? But that's that's where the key ingredient comes in, because if I didn't have God, I wouldn't be here. Because there's times where I struggled, there's times where I didn't have money, you know what I'm saying? My kids always have food, and maybe I would think differently then, but I believe that faith is what made sure that they were good the whole time. You know what I mean? And I just trusted God. I knew from that first video I shot with my friend's camera that he lent me, I'm like, okay, God gave me something here. And I enjoyed it, right? And so because of having that faith, I didn't have to waver or do something I didn't want to do to make sure that I made money or to make sure for security, right? My security was always in God, is always in God. And so like it's like, I feel like it's almost like a cheat code. You know what I mean? Because I see other people, they feel like they have to do certain things. And what's missing? Well, your faith in God, knowing that God is in control, knowing that he has his best interest for you, knowing the plans he has for your plans to prosper you, not to harm you, right? And I think that if there's anything people can take away, but it's tough because God says he gives you the measure of faith. And so that's where humbleness comes in, and just pure gratefulness that God even gave me the faith to have it in him. You know what I mean? And to trust.
It's so good. I was my assistant, I was talking to her yesterday, and we were just talking about, like, I had to do a lot of really interesting things this past season. It's like refunding lots of people because I'm
the marketing stuff,
marketing stuff, and it's a lot of money, but it's learning that sometimes you step into an arena that the season is over for. And so then it becomes challenging, even where things were really simple in the season.
Because your mind state changed about it. Like you hate it now. You don't want to do it. You're not
able to deliver in the same way that you were able to deliver. And so one of the things that she said that was really powerful, yesterday we were talking about it, is she said, Joe, there's a proverb, and I know that proverb, and it says that with God's blessing, there's no sorrow attached to it.
Wow.
And I was like, it's so true. The blessings of God, with it, And there's another verse that I've kind of this season has been, it's better little with peace than a lot with strife, you know, and I think in our culture, because we're in a culture of plenty, everything, but we don't realize that the peace that you have
is worth more than
you
anything.
Talk to anybody.
Yeah.
Once, whether it's war, whether it's personal peace, whatever it might be, once peace is gone, nothing else matters, dog.
Yeah. You go to war for peace.
You know what I mean? That's so well said. Brought to mind them. That's it. We'll go to war for peace.
Yeah. I think, especially once you taste peace and you know what it's like.
Right.
Yes.
And then that kind of gets disrupted.
Yeah.
But it's tough to find peace when you have bills, right? And again, but that's where it's like you have to override your system and have that faith in God that says everything will be all right.
Right.
Everything's going to be taken care of. This is temporary. It's a moment in time. And even before I found God, it's funny. It was like a mindset that I had. There would be beef or whatever, right? And then you're like always on alert. You always wonder when you might get a call or you might run into them on the street, whatever the case is. And I remember like one time I was in the shower and there was like a couple of guys that I had problems with. And like it was just constantly like running through my mind and causing me anxiety and just whatever. And I remember thinking like, you know, in a year from now, I'm not even going to know about this. Exactly. I'm not even going to remember it. I'm not even going to think about it.
Exactly.
And it's like, it's so temporary. So just remove yourself from that temporary and know that in a year or two from now, I guess it's so long as you have that,